We going?
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Whenever you're ready to start yapping.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Good to be with you today. So this is Wanda and Amber Holloway. Amber, as you can see here, is not very happy. She's just tried out for the cheerleading team. It's 1991. She's tried out for the cheerleading team for the second year in a row and been rejected for the second year in a row. Cheerleading is something that's really important to her, but is super important to her mom. Her mom was a cheerleader, and she kind of wants to live vicariously through her daughter. And what really bothers her is that, I gotta double check her first name yet. No, so it's Wanda and Shauna Holloway. Excuse me, I'm a liar. All right.
Hello?
And what really bothers them is that this girl, Amber Heath, keeps scoring a place on the team. And they think she's not nearly as good a cheerleader as Shauna is. And so, since cheerleading is so important, and look, cheerleading there are much worse things you can get into in high school. Cheerleading is a very good activity for somebody to get into in high school, but cheerleading is so important to Wanda, the mother, that she hires somebody to kill Amber's mother. Reasoning. Now hang on, wait till you hear her reasoning. People are making faces. You're judging her before you've got the whole story here. All right, gosh. Her reasoning is that, well, if Amber's mother gets murdered, Amber will be so emotionally traumatized by this that she won't be able to stay on the cheerleading team, and a slot will open up for Shauna. Right? So now it's okay, right? No, so thanks. Somebody's willing. Whoever said no out loud, was that you, Kendra? Yes, Kendra's willing to take the controversial stands against hiring a hitman to kill your cheerleading rival. What Wanda did is she turned cheerleading into what we call a totalizing ideology. There's nothing about cheerleading in and of itself that's bad. But she set cheerleading as the sum total of what matters in life. And cheerleading, for her daughter's ability to cheerlead, became not only the dominant factor in her life, but the thing, the lens, the hermeneutic, if you will, through which she saw everything else. So all of her reality, all of her sense of identity, revolved around cheerleading. And when the world didn't match her ideology, because her daughter wasn't a cheerleader, it wasn't the ideology that was wrong. It was the world that was wrong. And the world that had to be broken. The world that had to be remade, reshaped, so that it would match the totalizing ideology. And that's precisely what she attempted to do. She was convicted, and but that doesn't bring Verna Heath, the mother of Amber, doesn't bring her back to life. Our time, and by our time I mean our time, the time of our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, the 20th century, the 21st century. We live in an era of totalizing ideologies. And the reason anytime I talk about this, even though I can never remember the names, every time I talk about this, I open by talking about the 1991 Texas Cheerleading Massacre, is to point out that anything can be made into a totalizing ideology. Something that's good in itself, or neutral in itself, and of course things that are bad in themselves, can all be made into totalizing ideologies. They can all be made into idols. If you remember the story of the Israelites worshiping the golden calf, I'm not trying to make a religious point here, but just get inside the text of the story, and they had just seen all sorts of miracles and things worked, and they said, nah, baby cows are more important to us. Anything can be made into a totalizing ideology. But there are a few things that have a much greater danger of being made into totalizing ideologies. And again, the fact that they have this danger doesn't make them bad in themselves. But the more central and important something is to people, the more of a temptation it is to turn it into their own golden calf or their own totalizing ideology. And so things such as religion, politics, nations, race, those are all very, very, very tempting to idolize. And much of the suffering and bloodshed of the last century and a quarter, exactly, because we just finished 25 years. Yeah, so much of the bloodshed of the last century and a quarter, which is the bloodiest time in human history. Right? The world had never seen anything like the catastrophic loss of life of French Revolution, World War I, World War II. Much of that won't come to any surprise to you. Maybe you didn't have the term in your head, totalizing ideology, but much of that boils down to totalizing ideologies attempting to remake the world in their own image. And then it happens in smaller ways too. Right? Not every example of this is a potential world conqueror and genocidal maniac. We see it with people who get really, really, really attached to their own political perspectives. I have a political perspective. Anybody who's paying attention has some political perspective, so there's nothing bad about that. Plato says that if you're not involved with politics, you're an idiot. But there are some folks who make an idol out of that. I remember not the past election, but the one before, the 2020 election, which wasn't any nicer than the 2024. They weren't any friendlier to each other. And I remember seeing a friend of mine post on Facebook, and this is 2020, Facebook was still somewhat usable, and now it's just garbage. It's just AI slop and scams. But this was not a guy that I knew of to be like a radical or anything like that, a friend from high school. He made a post. He says, if you're voting for blank, the candidate that he didn't like, we're not family anymore. Now, I'm not part of his family, but just think of how chilling a message like that is. If you're not voting for the guy I'm voting for in the parade of losers that have been put before us year after year after year, then we're not family anymore. Then our blood ties, our common experiences, the love that we're supposed to have, not only because we're supposed to, but that kind of love is kind of biological too. It kind of comes natural, is trumped by a political idea. Think of, we talked about this when the first one happened, Think of all the voices that were celebrating when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, who's an outspoken conservative, or then just a few weeks ago when Rob Reiner was murdered by his own son, and he's an outspoken liberal, and then see people arguing over whose was worse, whose reactions, who got the worst reactions, Well, there were, more people celebrating Charlie Kirk by orders of magnitude, but the voices celebrating Rob Reiner were coming from much more influential people. So how are you gonna, what are you gonna do about that other than vomit and say, some people have made some of these things golden calves, golden idols, totalizing ideologies. How did our age become an age of totalizing ideologies? That's what I want to explore with you today. All right, so let's go back in time. Now, you might think that Christianity in the Middle Ages is a prime candidate for a totalizing ideology. And it certainly had moments when it would cross over, when you would look at particular elements of what's going on in the Middle Ages, when you would look at the treatment of the Jews, persecution of heretics, some of the religious wars, Christianity does spill into the totalizing ideology category in the Middle Ages. But it had a couple of things built in that prevented it from being like nonstop totalizing ideology for its 1,000 years of dominance. And the biggest thing built into it is that medieval Christianity introduced the notion of the secular. That there are some things that are religious, that are spiritual things, and there are some things that are not. Right? There are some things that are the concern of just human beings living their human lives. All of that stemming from something Jesus said in the Gospels when people were trying to trip him up. They showed him a coin. The coin had Augustus Caesar's face on one side and pagan God on the back. And like, are we allowed to pay taxes to Caesar using this filthy pagan coin? And he said, render unto God the things that are God's and unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. That introduces the world to the concept of the secular. Religion has something to say about everything in the Middle Ages, but not everything in the Middle Ages is religious. And that distinction between the sacred and the secular prevents Christianity from becoming like a continent-wide totalizing ideology. A couple of developments happen, good developments, or at least arguably good developments. One, when you have people like Thomas Aquinas and the scholastics rediscovering the ancient Greek and Roman learning, that puts into sort of the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, that puts into the common conversation the idea that we can actually make the world better. Before that, in the Middle Ages, there was really no hope of making the world better. We're just hoping to go to heaven when we die. Remember how hard the Middle Ages were when they started out. And the rediscovery of ancient learning put into our minds, no, we can actually improve this world. Now look, yeah, in the early Middle Ages, if there was a hole in the wall, you could patch it. And if you broke your arm, it would heal. But there was no notion that this world could really be transformed and made better. The rediscovery of ancient learning gave us that notion. We can really improve this world, and therefore the things we do to improve this world matter. They're worth doing, they're worth their time and attention. And it also planted this seed that sometimes the best way to improve the future is to look back to the past. Because in this particular case, that was true. Things were a lot better. Earthly things were a lot better in the days of ancient Greece and Rome. Fast forward to about 300 years, and now you have the Reform movement, the Protestant Reformation in Europe. And what that put into the zeitgeist, it amplified this idea of if you want to make the future better, you've got to look back at the past. Because very quickly the Reformation became about more than fixing corruption in the church. It greatly diversified Christianity, and it did so by saying, you know what? All the people that came before us for the last 1,000 years have been getting a lot of important things wrong. We read the Bible, we see that it says to do this, and everybody's been saying something different for 1,000 years. How do we make sense of that? Well, we either say, well, maybe we're reading it incorrectly, or we say something went wrong in the distant past within Christianity, and that the way to make a better future is to purify Christianity, to turn the clock back and send Christianity back to what it was like in the very beginning, in some, I don't want to say perfect, that would be exaggerating, but in a much more faithful and pure time. Some of them even call themselves Puritans for this reason. So that became the project in those countries where the Reformation movement really took off. It's another of the important steps here. Who's familiar with this word? Utopia. Yeah, somebody come tell me what it means. What's a utopia? Marcos, come on. I guess you should have a chair.
So, a utopia is basically like a perfect society?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ever been to one?
No.
Okay, so here's where the notion of utopia comes from, all right? So this fella here is St. Thomas More, right? He's born in 1478 in England. He's like the last, there's no way for a statement like this to be literally true, but it's meaningfully true anyway. He's like the last great figure of the Middle Ages. Okay? He's a lawyer and a poet and a scholar and a husband and a father and a really, really close friend of King Henry VIII. And he writes a book called Utopia. That's where we get the term from. It's the title of St. Thomas More's book. And in the book, he imagines, it's presented as a satirical fiction. Right? He imagines that he has encountered somebody from a newly discovered country called Utopia that's somewhere over on this side of the world, because it's the early 1500s and this side of the world is new to everybody. So it's like somewhere between the Caribbean and South America or something like that is Utopia. And he describes this perfect life in Utopia. It is a land with perfectly just laws. It is a land with no greed. It is a land where there is no offensive warfare, and where when they have to engage in defensive warfare, they've got it down to a science to minimize loss of life and to reinstitute peace as soon as possible. There is no poverty. There is religious freedom. And everybody shares all their goods in common. People for 500 years have been scratching their heads about what Thomas More is really trying to get at in this book, Utopia, because a lot of these ideas that he's praising in this book are very different from the things he says when he's speaking about as himself. But the key to his book, Utopia, and why it's so visionary, the key is to be found in the name of the character who comes from Utopia, he's given a Latin name, but it roughly translates to, and in my English translation is actually called Nonsenso, is the Utopian, and the name Utopia translates to no place or nowhere. And at the very end of the book, he's written himself into the book. Thomas More is engaging in a dialogue with Nonsenso, and he says, well, a lot of your ideas sound great, but some of them I'm not sure about, but that's all I got time to say for today. And then he never picks up the topic again. I think what St. Thomas was doing here is, I think and I don't mean this in like some prophetic way, but I just think he had the foresight to see what was coming in the world of ideas. And that what was coming was what we now call utopian thinking. That the idea not that we can make the world better and should, but the idea that we can make things perfect and will make things perfect is going to be one of the most dangerous ideas ever introduced to the world. And the book, by putting it in the mouth of somebody named Nonsenso, was More's attempt to warn the world. Part of the reason More wasn't able to go into more detail and just say, okay, here's exactly what I was getting at, is when Henry VIII divorced and declared himself head of the church, Thomas More wouldn't endorse that. He didn't even speak against it. He just wouldn't endorse it. And so King Henry beheaded him. And his last words were, I die the king's good servant, but God's first. The utopian drive, the notion that we can make a perfect world, and that, even worse, that it's inevitable, has given birth to more totalizing ideologies and brought death to more people than any idea that's ever been shared in the history of the world. And the first real explosion of this happens during a movement that I'm more torn about than any other, right? Because I'm sort of like, my heart is sort of split between being a medieval man who was born in the wrong time and an Enlightenment man who was born at the wrong time. The Enlightenment, which you're reading about now, somebody want to tell me just a little bit about what the Enlightenment was? Mark was already here. You want to talk about it? Just briefly.
All right. So the Enlightenment was a period of time following the medieval era, and it focused a lot on essentially like revolutionary thinking that emphasized like personal liberty, like God-given rights, and like equality.
Yeah. I'll say personal liberty, God-given rights, equality, reason, learning. The first encyclopedia, this massive undertaking by Denis Diderot, emerges out of the Enlightenment. Rousseau and Voltaire and Thomas Jefferson. I got a statue of the guy, right? Our republic is the first real fruit of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment gave us, so here, just this, look, logic and reason, science, education, liberalism, medicine, engineering, revolutions, capitalism, health, inventions, democracy, wealth, freedom and pursuit of happiness. These are things I couldn't do without, right? I would not want to live in an unenlightened world. There's so much that came from the Enlightenment that made the world better. And because some of these ideas were so obviously true, and because they were forged, for once history is not written in blood, it's written in coffee. They were forged by dudes, nerds, sitting around, drinking coffee, wearing pantyhose, and talking about big ideas. I love this. It produced, none of the things I'm looking for are in the right place. Everything's in the wrong place. All right, so it produced the Declaration of the Rights of Man, and I have a whole slide with like the best of the Declaration of Rights of Man, and it's not in here anymore. Hang on. And it's just not in there anymore. Okay. The Enlightenment thinkers in France produced the Declaration of the Rights of Man, that people should not be prevented from expressing their minds, that everybody should have equal opportunity and equal rights, liberty, fraternity, egalitarianism, or equality. And it produced a revolutionary movement that some of you are studying right now in Cambridge, right? In Cambridge history, you do the French Revolution, some of you? Now? No? Am I imagining that? No. Okay. Well, you should.
And European history does it.
Oh, European history does it. Yeah. It produced a revolution that descended into an absolute bloodbath that's now known to the world as the Reign of Terror. It introduced the guillotine, and then it introduced hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children to the guillotine. Why? Because they said, we've found the way. We've found the way to make the world better. Which turns anyone who is anything other than enthusiastically in support of the way into an enemy. I know how to build utopia. I know how to build the perfect world. Do you know how much better life will be for everyone once we institute the perfect world? And Megan, you want to try to stop me from instituting? You're not going to film me while I'm... You want to try to stop me from instituting the perfect world? You want to make the world worse? That means more poor babies die and stuff. Off with your head. Why? Why do I get to do that? It's Megan's head right here. And I'm still like, pow, pow. Why? I almost have to if I've drunk the Kool-Aid. Do we know that figure of speech? If I've bought into the Utopia. Dennis Diderot, who gave us the first encyclopedia and who wrote eloquently on how much good can be done by getting out of science's way and letting research happen and elevating reason. I like that. I like the other thing. And by giving everybody rights, I like that. And by elevating freedom of speech, he said, man will never be free until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest. Liberty, fraternity, equality, where'd that go? It got its head cut off with a guillotine, just like Marie Antoinette. You know, I don't even want to YouTube. You can't even use the word of what they did to all the nuns without getting your video pulled. It's a shame. You know, what kept our revolution? You know, what kept the American Revolution from going that way was really that we built argument, we built the debate between differing perspectives into our Constitution, right? So, and we have four letters in the preamble of the Constitution that saved the United States from going down the route of the French Revolution. It's the word more. We, the people of the United States of America, in order to form not a perfect union, but a more perfect union. We're doing this to make things better. We've not decided that we are the golden calves that all will bow to our ideas. The tragic fact is the most harm is often done by those who are intending to do the most good. And that is really what marks the 20th and 21st centuries more than anything else. It's the hermeneutic of rupture in the extreme, right? That everything that came, that how pitiful it is that there were people who had the misfortune to have to live before me, before I came along and figured everything out, and now have the key to making the world perfect. So what's coming next in your reading? So you're reading about the Enlightenment, you're reading about Kant, you're reading about Hegel, and you're reading about Romanticism. Kant. So Kant is very complicated, and Hegel even more so. And sometimes when you read Kant, he's so obviously wrong, but the problem is he's so much, I'm talking to me too, not just you, he's so much smarter than you that you can't figure out why he's wrong. You can just tell that he is. But the poor guy, not that he's wondering what I think about him, but the poor guy is actually trying, he's trying to bring some continuity back, all right? He's trying to bridge the gap between the empiricists and between the rationalists. And so he comes up with this notion that there are like two spheres of reality. This is my bad description, not his. So there's the world as it is in itself, the thing in itself. But then there are also features of my mind, right, that are sort of cooked into my mind. And that some of the things I assume about my experience that are features, that some things I assume about my experience are real, are parts of the world as it is in itself, are actually just features of my mind. Time, for Kant, time is not a feature of the world as it is in itself. It's a feature of the mind. It doesn't matter, but I'm actually very sympathetic to that idea. Space for Kant is not a feature of things as they are in themselves. It's a feature of the mind. It's something within the mind that helps us interpret what we get from the world as it is in itself through our experience. I'm sympathetic to that too. Causality. Causality is a feature of the mind, not a feature of the world in itself. I'm not sympathetic to that one. Because that's the biggest rupture of all time. If the notion of, if cause and effect, right, the principle of cause and effect, the principle of sufficient reason, that nothing can come into be or nothing can happen without a sufficient reason to cause it to happen. Give it. What causes Leo's head to hurt?
You hitting me?
Huh? Me hitting Leo. So Kant would say, that's that thing that you hit Leo and then Leo's head hurts and you hitting Leo caused Leo's head to hurt. That's all just your mind interpreting the data. That's not a feature of the world as it is in itself. If he's right, I can't prove to you that he's wrong, by the way, but if he's right, if causality is not real, then we're not able to know anything, is my diagnosis of that, right? It's kind of like 2 + 2 = 4. Okay? If mathematical knowledge is so close to absolute certain, if 2 + 2 = 4 is wrong, I can't prove it's not. But if it is, then reality as it is in itself has no relationship whatsoever to what we perceive, in which case we cannot ever actually know anything, in which case game over. But A, I have no reason to think that, and B, I have no reason to listen to Kant if one of his fundamental ideas destroys the ability of the mind to reason. All right? So that's major rupture coming from Kant. Another major rupture coming from Kant is he says that God and spiritual things are completely inaccessible to reason. Kant's what we call a pietist, who says faith is its own separate thing, and you just believe because that, well, remember 500 years before him and Thomas Aquinas, how he bridges the gap between faith and reason, and his ability to do that was the only reason that we let them bring Aristotle back and recover medieval learning. And okay, Kant wants to rupture that. So, you know what, you take it or leave it at your discretion, but it's not continuity at any rate. Romanticism. All right, so you're reading about romanticism and this. A lot of different things are going on at the same time in romanticism, and you know everything's got a bright side and a shadow side. And some of the stuff that's going on in romanticism is more of this stuff I just couldn't do without. Some of the best art, some of the best music. There's this nostalgia for a pure past. We've heard this before, but it's like an emotional nostalgia. So people are interested in like reclaiming, you know, their own nation's folklore and stories, and you have beautiful works of art going on, and you have this elevation of emotion that your feelings matter. That's all good. I teach literature. You know, I'm not.
Samuel Gabriel, please come to the front office. Samuel Gabriel, please come to the front office.
But you know, yeah, we just don't get to have nice things, because what romanticism also introduces, it introduces a strong sense of connection to identity related to my ethnic group, related to my race. And so now when we speak of, when somebody in the Romantic period speaks of like our heritage, I use that kind of language all the time. I'm talking about the heritage of Western civilization that spans 3 continents and is, multi-ethnic and multilingual and all that stuff. But now my race, my heritage really becomes like there's a something special about Frenchness, Italianness, Germanness, where I want the spirit of my nation, and I speak about that as if it's true, or maybe even start to believe it's true. And I want the spirit of my nation to be elevated. I want the spirit of my nation to rise above the others. And I want the spirit of my nation to behave like the heroes in our stories used to behave. And how did the heroes in our stories used to behave? They conquered. They gave no quarter to the now somehow less than human others of other nations. The now somehow reduced to vermin that would dare to get in the way of the rise of my nation. And if you're looking at these dates, these movements, and you're subtracting them from 1932 when Hitler comes to power, and you're noticing that the numbers are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. There's a reason for that. All of this is building to somewhere. And then we'll meet Hegel. You're reading about Hegel. Hegel's probably the hardest philosopher to read, primary sources, probably the hardest to understand. What he wants to do is get rid of continuity altogether, in a sense. What he wants to do is he wants to say that for him the world is alive. He brings back Plato's world soul, all right? But the world soul is alive, but it is constantly evolving, right? And as the world is evolving, that means that what is good evolves, what is beautiful evolves, what is true evolves, which means what's true today might not have been true 1,000 years ago and might not be true 1,000 years from now. And what is the process through which this evolution takes place? We're almost done for those like, when's this guy can shut up? What's the process through which the world evolves into what morphs, mutates into what its next version's going to be? It's this dance. So you start with where we are now. He calls that thesis. And then you introduced the opposite. You introduce rupture intentionally. He calls that antithesis. Thesis, antithesis. What we say versus its opposite, you put them into combat, and then what comes out the other side, he calls synthesis, and that's the new phase of the world, the new truth, the new goodness, the new beauty, until it comes time to introduce rupture again, until it comes time for antithesis to come into picture again. That's still very much with us. It's with us as filtered by the guy you're going to learn about in the next reading, Karl Marx, who's going to say, all right, the world soul, that's nonsense, but this thesis, antithesis, synthesis stuff, that's right on the money. And it's like literally still with some of you in my other class. Only now we take Hegel filtered through Marx, filtered through folks like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault, and we produce deconstruction and reconstruction cycle that we use in Cambridge courses. It's all just it's okay as a tool, but understand where the tool comes from. That it's Marxist. Okay, so that is Utopia Nowhere. Now we haven't said the last we're going to say about utopian movements. because, you know, we've got a big one coming up, and that would be Karl Marx, but we're not there till next week. That's all I need from you for today. Rest of time, please.